Welcome to the bonus show. So everybody's jumping in now on what billionaires could be doing and how much in taxes we could be collecting from billionaires, all because of the various proposals, none of which now we've learned are actually going to be part of the new infrastructure spending bill that is moving forward. But because of all the different proposals about how to tax billionaires in a serious manner, now the World Food Program says, hey, you know what? If we got a one-time $6 billion donation from Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, other billionaires, we could save 42 million people from starvation. Now, I think that this is a very interesting story because it's not news that we could solve hunger. Like we've been saying for a really long time on this show, and it's been known for a really long time. We actually have all the resources we need to solve hunger. If you just look at calories grown per day on the planet and number of people, the numbers work. Now, of course, you've got to start taking away from that spoilage, carbon footprint. Some of these calories might have to be relocated really far. You know, there's obviously logistical things to figure out. But the point, Pat, is we've known that solving hunger is just a decision. It's like, do we do it? Some will say, well, okay, David, yes, in some general sense, like we have the money and we have the calories, but it is a big undertaking. And I don't deny that. But the people surprised, like, wow, 6 billion could save 42 million people. Like, yes, we've been saying this all along. The question is actually getting the political will and the logistical infrastructure in order to actually do it.
Yeah, we have to get the whole world on the same team, which can be tough to do, especially when we're all going through our own crises. Like, of course, COVID is still a big issue now, and the U.S. has these budgetary issues. A lot of these budgetary issues are made up, right, because we don't have to spend as much as we do on the military.
Sure.
We could reallocate some of these funds, but we just decide not to. And so it's interesting how now the World Food Program Director is appealing to billionaires instead of governments, saying, okay, well, these governments are tapped out of resources or they're just unwilling to do so. So maybe Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, you could make a contribution and we can solve world hunger. And I understand why the director is doing this. Whether or not these billionaires are actually going to take that person up on the offer, that's a whole different question.
The other question is, just because any organization says, here's what it would cost, doesn't mean that if you hand that organization the money, they actually have the resources and the wherewithal to do it. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm conceding that it's not as simple as we decide to end hunger today and next week it's done. But if you start kind of categorizing, first, these 42 million people are the ones at most dire straits when it comes to starvation. Taking care of those 42 million would be about a $6 billion endeavor, period. You really start to think, wow, that's really not a lot of money when you're thinking about the global economy.
It would have to be a recurring payment, though, right? Like, I have a tough time believing that there's just a one-time payment of $6 billion and then that's it, right? I mean, I suppose you can set up the infrastructure to make that happen, but it seems like it would have to be maybe $6 billion on an annual basis. Whatever the number is, that seems incredibly slow. That seems incredibly small, don't you think?
Well, I think part of it is it's not just you buy food for $6 billion and ship it to people. I think part of the $6 billion includes creating infrastructure for growing and producing food in some of these areas. Like I think that it's more than just hand food over to people. So hopefully some of it would contribute to long-term food stability.
And another thing that people often bring up is housing, right? Because we hear statistics about how with a one-time $80 billion payment, or sometimes it's $50 billion, the numbers can vary. We can end homelessness here in the U.S., but it may not be that straightforward, of course, because not everyone wants to go to homeless shelters. Sometimes you have to deal with issues of drug abuse before you can necessarily deal with issues of shelter. And so, yeah, that money would do some good, certainly, but it wouldn't wipe out homelessness altogether. I think donating to help people eat, that seems a little bit more straightforward to me, because I don't know if there's these other compounding factors that prevent people from getting the food. Like if you're hungry, you're going to want to take people up on that offer who are providing you the food. Shelter may not necessarily be the same thing.
Yeah, I would consider it. I think that you're right in that it's, let me see how I can say this. It goes without saying that at this point, no one should be going hungry on planet Earth. and it should just be fixable. Like within a year, we should be able to fix it. Homelessness is more complicated in different ways. We should still be able to deal with it in the United States, but fixing global homelessness is far more complicated. I think that's the point you're trying to make. Both are fixable, but the food thing should just be like, guys, come on, what are we doing here?
And they both have to be top priorities. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess you can put food ahead of shelter, but both are super, super important. And we'll have to see if any of these billionaires take the World Food Program director up on the offer.
Right.
I'm not holding my breath, though,
No.
even though we hear about stories about Elon Musk, for example, now being worth about $240 billion. What's a few $10 billion, right, give or take. But he probably will decide not to do it because he considers his money to be more valuable elsewhere, and he wants to keep it.
I think you're absolutely right. Hey, Iran nuclear deal is getting going. Iran said yesterday that by the end of November, it's going to go back to negotiating around the 2015 nuclear deal. This is the deal that was signed when Barack Obama was president. Donald Trump just bailed on it. Iran didn't violate it. They just bailed on it. Trump did, rather. And Iran's deputy foreign minister made the announcement on Twitter saying that they are going to be re-engaging in dialogue and negotiating before the end of November. Exact date remains to be announced. I think that this is a really great thing. The right hates the deal. The truth is Iran didn't violate it. You could have argued at the start the deal's not strict enough, or the deal doesn't include enough oversight, or it's not enough wide-reaching, or whatever. But once the deal started, we had no reason to believe that Iran was violating the deal. Once Trump bailed on the deal, we predicted, and so did others because it was so obvious, well, now Iran's going to want a negotiating chip. So now they probably would be logically going back to doing the research and the enrichment that they were not supposed to be doing. Believe that that indeed did start happening. And then now it looks like the negotiations are going to restart. So do I think that the Iran nuclear deal was perfect? No. Do I think that there's always some element of, well, why do these countries get to decide whether those countries get to have nukes? That being said, I think that it is different for some countries to have them versus others, although I am generally speaking for nuclear disarmament. But putting all of that stuff aside, it was a pretty good deal that Iran was sticking with until Trump decided to just say, we're done with it. And so I welcome this.
I do wonder what's going to happen next, though. Like, even if Iran does come to the negotiating table and they work out a deal that's similar, if not the same as the one that we had signed back in, 2015?
Yep.
Then we could see a new president take over in 2024, maybe a Republican president, someone like Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, and you know that they're just going to pull out of the deal again. And we've talked about how this is a risk all along, right? And the word of the U.S. isn't really going to be worth much if every 4 years we keep making agreements and then backing out of them. I suppose that shouldn't stop us from trying to make this agreement now, right? Because that would, at least in the short term, do some good. And you can't predict the future. You don't know for sure that a Trump type right winger is going to take over in a few years, but we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose.
The other thing that is almost certainly going to become an issue is that diplomatic word in the United States is that before the U.S. re-engages, the U.S. would stipulate that Iran needs to fully come back into compliance and prove that they're in compliance in order to remove any of the sanctions that are on Iran. Whereas my expectation would be that there would be other negotiating parties and Iran itself that would say, hold on a second, you guys bailed, so we went back to doing some stuff. We'll get back into compliance, but we need the sanctions to stop right away. We're not willing to sign a deal which says, oh, in 2 years, once you've demonstrated you're in compliance, then the sanctions come off. I think that could become a sticking point where Iran says, we will commit to getting into compliance, but you've got to drop the sanctions now. And the U.S. may not agree to that. That could become a big negotiating problem.
I mean, I do think that we have less leverage now because we're the ones that pulled out of the deal. So, yeah, we're probably going to have to make some concessions like that. And also, I would imagine the U.S. has to take more of a backseat in these negotiations and let other countries like the U.K., France, Germany, everyone else involved do sort of the talking here. And the U.S. can just sort of sign on to whatever the rest of these nations come up with. Because at this point, we just have no legitimacy. There's no reason why we should be leading the charge here.
Which was exactly what we said would be the problem longer term when Donald Trump unilaterally bailed on the deal. So everything happening as predicted, and now we'll have to just wait and see.
One more thing about this. Do you know how with NAFTA, Trump decided to end that deal and then he signed the USMCA,
Yeah.
which was basically just the same thing as
Yes.
NAFTA, but
Yes.
slightly reworded? Are you surprised he didn't try to do something similar with Iran? Or do you think it makes sense because it irritated Iran and the rest of the world to such a degree where they weren't willing to compromise with Trump and go back to the negotiating table with
I
him?
don't think Iran would have been willing to say, hey, let's do the exact same thing, but call it something else to give Trump a political victory. There's no way they were going to go for that.
Yeah, maybe Mexico and Canada, because they're seen as more of our allies, would
Yeah.
be willing to do such a thing, but Iran, not necessarily. I get that.
Hey, we've been covering the decline in cigarette smoking in the United States that's been taking place for literally decades at this point in time, which is a great thing. It's a very welcome thing. Cigarette sales increased last year for the first time in 2 decades. Tobacco companies spent more money on marketing, and the FTC said in its cigarette report that almost 204 billion cigarettes were sold last year versus 203 billion cigarettes in 2019. Now, it's a modest increase, but remember, we had been seeing a decline. Now, the report doesn't say why this happened, but there's a couple different things we can point to. One, tobacco companies, cigarette companies spent more money on marketing and advertising and promotion. Typically, you get a return on that. You with normal products, you advertise more as long as there's a market for it. If you spend more on advertising, you do more sales. So that's one explanation. They also did some more bulk discounting in order to make the cigarettes a little bit cheaper. So remember, the number of cigarettes sold went up. Total revenue, I'm less sure about. That would be something we have to look at. The intuitive assumption is stress of the pandemic, lockdowns, people saving money on other things and thus buying more cigarettes are kind of like intuitively the things that are being pointed to. The report doesn't actually say that, but that's what's being kind of suggested, I think is the point.
I have one more theory too, which is that in March of 2020, we saw a lot of stockpiling, right? Everyone
Yeah.
buying a bunch of toilet paper and all these other things. So maybe cigarette smokers were buying a bunch of cigarettes as well. And so they had a big stockpile that they purchased in March of 2020. And that maybe to some extent holds them over even until today.
Could be.
So that's one other hope, I suppose. I'm saying hope because we don't want to see rates of cigarette smoking go back up. And, it suggests that it is maybe going back up slightly if we're seeing the rates of purchasing going back up. So, hopefully this is just a blip and then we go back down with the rates of tobacco and cigarettes purchased for this year. But we just don't know yet.
We have just a little bit of data for this year, and it does
Okay.
seem that for the period ending March 27, so basically like Q1 is what they're saying, sales of cigarettes were back down almost 5%, which is great to see. Now, there's one other confounding factor here, which is that over recent years, some of the decline in regular cigarette purchases was replaced by e-cigarettes and other affiliated products, I guess we would call them. So some of it is replacement, but there's actually e-cigarettes, which have also been declining most recently. So hopefully it's all going in the right direction. I don't know.
Yeah, and we know that e-cigarettes shouldn't be seen as a replacement for smoking regular cigarettes because they still are unhealthy, but
Yeah.
it's proven at this point that they are healthier, right? I mean, if
I
you're going to
don't
have
know
to pick
that.
one or the other.
I don't know. I
No?
mean, that was my working belief for a very long time. I just am not sure one way or the other at this point.
Yeah, I mean, with cigarettes generally, it took decades to actually see the results of what long-term smoking would be on the body, on the lungs. And so maybe we have to wait until e-cigarettes have been around for a long time to really make some assumptions and conclusions about the effects of
Supposing we
them.
hit the
But yeah, I
body
mean, everyone
with a
sort of
tremendous,
works with that assumption, and
very
maybe it's to our
powerful light.
detriment. Everyone thinks, okay, well, obviously the vapor is going to be less harmful than the smoke is.
Yeah.
And, maybe there are fewer carcinogens and all this other stuff, but perhaps we just don't know yet.
Yeah, those are the assertions that are made. I just am so skeptical of the things any of these companies say. And I know that one of the issues, I think, with the e-cigarettes was that you might unknowingly, without realizing it, even though on like if you compare apples to apples, it's less bad, but it makes it so easy to consume way more that it may not in practice the way it's being used be any healthier. I don't, something like that,
Yeah. especially because you can sort of sneak those and vape those inside, right? I
Oh,
mean, I
that
see
right.
people doing that all the time.
Some people are on it like a baby bottle all day.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I think regardless of what we find out, it's
Yeah.
going to be shown that the best things to put into your lungs are nitrogen and oxygen, and we should leave some of this other stuff out.
Nitrogen. There it is. There's an idea.
Well, yeah.
I actually heard kids these days are huffing nitrogen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's big in the atmosphere, isn't
They
it?
love it. They
Isn't it
absolutely
the
love
most
it.
common gas in the atmosphere, or am I thinking of something else?
The bioavailability of it is very, very big.
Okay.
Okay. Let's. So what do we have coming up next week? So actually, let me back up. Not Tesla. SpaceX has a launch this Sunday, which I would normally love to cover, but it's scheduled for 2:21 in the morning. I'm not going to do a live stream at 2:21 in the morning Eastern time, but with weather, you know how it can get delayed, Pat. So if I wake up Sunday morning and the launch hasn't happened, I may do a stream. Tuesday night, we have the Virginia gubernatorial election.
Nice word.
And I will be live streaming those results. And there's others, like I know it's Boston mayoral. There's a bunch of other races too.
Isn't there New Jersey? Don't they have a gubernatorial race also? But maybe that's getting less coverage because it's a solid blue state most of the time.
I think you're right.
It is election day everywhere, just about. So there should be some other races to follow.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty strong stream, I expect. So that'll be on Tuesday. And then, as I've said before, if Donald Trump ends up going to Virginia to campaign for the Republican candidate there, Glenn Youngkin, who has been kind of keeping Trump away because it seems like it wouldn't be particularly useful. But Trump said something about "we'll see you soon, Virginia" on his website yesterday. If a rally gets scheduled, if anybody in the audience sees it, please let me know, because that's something I would like to stream. That would be an interesting, kind of like final event before the election. And also, if Barack Obama or Joe Biden are going back to Virginia to campaign for Terry McAuliffe, I would be interested in streaming that. Now, Pat, I know tomorrow you're going to be talking about your upcoming Odyssey. It's sort of like Homer's Odyssey. Do you want to say anything about it today at all?
Yeah, I'll talk more about it tomorrow, I anticipate. But the big news is that I'm going to be going to Florida for the next 2 months, or Florida, depending on
Which
how
are
you
you
want
going
to?
to, I guess? Because I need to know
I'm
for
gonna
payroll
ping-pong
reasons.
back and forth.
Okay,
I'm
because
gonna do both.
unemployment insurance through payroll is much higher in Florida than in Florida. So it's good to know.
Okay, well, we'll have to consider all of the different benefits and everything there. So I'm actually going to be driving down because, of course, I'll need a car there.
Sure.
So it's really quite the odyssey. It's going to take a couple of days to get down there. And so I'm going to be spending the weekend driving down there on a solo road trip. That should be fun. Maybe I'll have some stories from that. And then I'm going to be renting out a place in Florida for those 2 months up until the end of the year holidays. It's near the beach. It has a pool. It should be fun. It's really just to get away more than anything else, to escape the cold up in the Northeast. It's not for any political reasons or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's going to be a good time.
I also am planning on being in warmer climates in December, although I am not planning to go to Florida or Florida. I'm going to try to stick to blue states if I can. Although I know Florida is very 50-50.
Well, you can come visit. I mean, we can hang out together and maybe even do the show in the same location like we used to do.
Do they even allow Jews in that part of Florida? Because it's not Miami, it's a totally different sort of thing.
Well, you'll be allowed in my house.
Okay, very good.
Not in the area. You'll be allowed there.
On the trip down, are you bringing Soylent, or are you planning to stop at diners, drive-ins, and dives?
I have one bottle left of Soylent, and I'm going to bring it with me just in case. But it's going to be a lot of outside food, I think, for the next couple of days. And then maybe I'll have to put in another Soylent order once I get down there.
Will you wear a mask if you dine indoors and say the trip takes you through South Carolina?
No, I don't want to get beat up. I mean, geez.
Right.
I'm not going to wear a mask. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm sure it's not going to be required of me anywhere I go. But I'll play it by ear.
You can probably sit outdoors also at wherever you're going to. Yeah. All right, good. So we'll hear more from Pat about the Pat's Odyssey, as we are calling it, on tomorrow's Friday bonus show. And we will be back with a new show tomorrow as well. Very exciting.